How's the sound?
Perfect. How about my sound? Perfect. Okay.
At the back of the room? Okay, see some nods. Excellent. So we so glad to be here today, speaking for Lisa. As some of you may know, because I see some familiar faces, I'm from Calgary, so it's just local. It's quite nice. And it's nice to be back in Vancouver, one of my favorite cities. And Lisa's from Denver, so not so far away either. Our talk today is, and this is something that we feel quite close to, is do testers have to code? Because we hear that a lot. More importantly, do they have to code to be useful? That's the question we're hoping to answer today, or maybe not answer, but give you something to think about. So a little bit about Lisa and myself. I'll start and then turn it over to Lisa. I've been working in Agile teams, either as a tester, a coach, more likely a tester/coach, lots of different variety of roles for many, many years, working in teams, anywhere from 5 months to a year and a half, helping them to transition, mostly working with testers and business people. In the last 5 or 6 years, I've been working in a slightly different way, more as a consultant, coming in to help teams for a few days here, maybe a few days every month, different kinds of things, a lot of training, that type of thing.
And I've been working on Agile teams about the same amount of time as Janet, started back in 2000. Couple not so Agile teams over the years, but generally I've been working as a tester on the teams, but I do a lot of things like this. I want to go to conferences to learn, so.
Whoop, that doesn't work. Test, test, test.
So
we'll stand over here.
Stay over here. So
no, I don't want to stand in front of the screen.
Oh, yeah. So I present at conferences just so I can get a free ride to the conference, so I can learn stuff. And so I enjoy sharing my experiences, especially when I get to pair with Janet on presenting and facilitating workshops like we're going to do tomorrow. So I get to try and learn a lot of new things with my teams, and then Janet and I try to work on that and see how can other people benefit from those ideas or those experiences.
Before we move on, we're going to do a little check here. We did checks before, but I'm thinking because we're standing here, you can't see the screen at all, can you? Partially, not very much.
That's not good.
Let's just try to move this a little bit out of the way. I hear this rumbling noise behind. Yeah, just kind of moving it out. So we can stand out of your way, maybe tip this a little bit more this way. Stand out of your way. Is that a little bit better? Okay. We will try not to walk in front of the screen, but I can't promise. I'm a walker.
Yeah, me too.
So we'll try. All right. So
how many people have heard this question before? I'll let you work the slide.
yeah, I'll work the slide.
Everyone on an Agile team should be able to write production code. Maybe people have heard
Yeah, a
that.
few.
When I started on my first extreme programming team back in 2000, I got to meet Ron Jeffries for the first time. He, at that time, had written one of the few books about extreme programming. And he said to me over drinks somewhere in Fort Collins, anyone on an XP team who's not writing production code is a useless fifth wheel.
Tears.
You can imagine how that made me feel. I actually went home and cried. And my husband said, "Are you going to let that guy scare you off? You really want to do this?" And he was right. I knew testers. I could see that these teams needed testers. I could see the ways that I could add value.
Yeah, and my first experience on an Agile team was similar, though not near as heartbreaking as that. I walked into my first team, and I was hired by the project manager, and I boldly walked in, because I had had some experience, it was kind of, we think we're doing Agile, but we're not real sure. But I walked into this team who was truly doing Agile, because half the team was from ThoughtWorks, and half the team was from TCPL, Trans-Canada Pipelines. And so I walked in, and the first thing that happens is one of the programmers comes up to me and says, you're the new tester. I said, yes. And he said, we're doing extreme programming. We do all our own testing, and we're doing a great job. What are you going to do? And it's interesting because that person has gone on to write the Agile Samurai book. And he's done a great job in explaining testing, though I think he could have done more. But hey, but we learned to work together, and that's what we did. So at the beginning, it was really tough. We didn't know how to add value.
So this is also kind of since maybe the dawn of time, not just the dawn of Agile, but everyone thinks if they could only automate the test, they would solve all their testing problems and they would have high quality products, right? So let's hire some software development engineers and test. Let's hire some programmers, and all those programmers will do is automate tests. And that's going to fix all our problems. But automation by itself, that doesn't build in any quality. That can help you in your attempts to bake quality into your product, but it's not the magical answer. People always want to have a magical answer. And you know, we still hear this because people don't want to face it. They've got to do a lot of hard work, get their whole team involved, and start solving these problems. They just want to be able to hire one or two experts who could just fix it for them.
Magic.
And so, so when we see job postings, I know the job postings in the Denver area, they're all asking for programming experience. Elizabeth Hendrickson did a survey, it's been about 5 or 6 years ago now, of job postings, 127 job postings for testers, and almost all of them asked for some programming experience. And that hasn't changed, even though that study's a few years old. I think it even maybe has gotten worse, that more and more of them are asking for software development engineers and tests and programmers. And of course, finding programmers who what they want to do is automate tests all the time, that's pretty rare. So I don't even know what these people are finding when they go out recruiting. But again, it's because they just think that that's going to answer all their questions. Now, they already have programmers. I never understand why these people don't ask the programmers that are already on their team to automate the test. But it is true that that the technical skills, a programming background could help. So on my last team that I was on almost 9 years, whenever we had to hire a tester, I would bring in people who were like, oh, this person's a great exploratory tester and she's got really great skills. Business analysis skills, working with customers and collaborating. She's got all these really great skills, and we would interview her, and I would think, wow, this is great. And my teammates, who were all programmers, would say, oh, no, that person's not a good fit. And I just couldn't figure it out. They finally admitted to me that if the person didn't have programming experience, they were afraid they wouldn't be able to talk to that person. That person wouldn't understand them when they talked to them. And so it's like, it's understandable. Now, of course, programmers should also learn something about testing so they can talk to us. But it is true that these technical skills help us communicate, help us testers communicate with more technical roles on the team.
So before we move on to the next slide, I was thinking while you were talking that in this group of people here, and I like that it's a nice small group. Last week I was at like 350, and it's really hard to kind of see everybody. How many would consider their main competency, their main role, to be testing? Okay.
Not everybody.
How many programmers in the room? Oh, excellent. So some are shy. Some are shy. They don't want to. Yeah.
Well, there are probably other roles like managers.
Yeah. Managers, test managers, yeah, okay. Any kind of product owner people, domain experts?
Scrum master type. Oh yeah, so
Couple.
we've got a good
So we've got a nice mix. So that's a good thing. It is a good thing. So our take on this, right? We would like to live in unicorn land. You know, I'm kind of all about fantasy most of the time. But in reality, there's a lot of skills we need to learn. Part of them is exploratory testing, having good exploratory testing, of course. But we really think competency. Rather than, I'll call myself a tester, but we know that the roles blur on Agile teams. But I have a strength. My strength is not programming. I used to program back just down the street over there at the Vancouver Stock Exchange. I programmed there for quite a few years. tells you how long it's been. But that's not my strength anymore. My strength is in testing because that's what I'm passionate about. So what is your competency, right? And we truly believe that when we talk about whole team, and we talk about whole team a lot, and we mean the delivery team. Who's responsible for delivering this feature? That team takes responsibility for quality, because we can't test quality and we can't automate quality, and the whole team really has to take that ownership. And sometimes that's a very difficult thing, which is why I'm really glad to see programmers here too. It's a good thing. When we think about testing as an activity rather than as a phase, all of a sudden we start thinking about testing early, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Testing ideas versus thinking about testing the software only. So we really want to know and take what is our main competency, what is our passion, what are we really good at, and how can we add value using those competencies, right? One of the things that has come out over the last, I've seen in different people, they talk about zombie testers. When you talk about a zombie tester, it's kind of like you see this automaton, right? Scripting, testing, just following that script. Did I follow that script? Did it go? Yes, right? There is no room on an Agile team for zombie testers. We need to be able to think. We need to be able to think critically and and really find out where our value is, right? And it comes down to that mindset shift. So this is kind of one of my favorite slides. So many times I would hire testers and I'd say, what is your job? And they would say, oh, it's to break the software or to find defects or to make sure all of those requirements are met. And I'd go, yeah, that's part of it, but there's much, much more to it, right? When we start thinking about how can we bake quality in, how can we help the team become more successful, all of a sudden we're starting to ask a lot of things differently. Our job is to help, to give feedback, to do many other things. So it really is a mindset shift.
Well, and it's a tough shift for those of us who worked on waterfall teams, that we were taught, well, don't test anything until the requirements are frozen and the code is all delivered and has passed all these quality gates, because otherwise you'll have to test it more than one time and that would be wasteful. And it's really hard in an Agile, all of a sudden you're testing some little chunk of a story as soon as it's checked in, and you're going to be testing it again because they're going to keep adding to it. And it seems wasteful until we realize, but it's saving so much time because we're finding those bugs right away and we're even preventing bugs from getting in the first place. So it's saving a huge amount of time. It isn't wasteful, but if you've been trained a different way, it's really hard to see it with the other perspective.
So we need to think differently, but we really, really need to talk about the technical skills. And I think some of the testers haven't figured out what that means. A few years ago at a workshop in Calgary, a lady named Lynn McKee from Calgary said the word technical awareness. I guess it's two words, phrase, but technical awareness. And I went, oh, that's the best phrase I've heard for a very long time to describe what we're talking about. We need technical awareness, right? And that means a lot of different things to a lot of different teams. And so then this next part, we're going to talk about what that might mean to you. And it will be a little bit different for every team. So I tend to think understanding how acceptance test-driven development works. You might call it a behavioral-driven development. You might call it specification by example. Maybe you call it example-driven development. I don't care what term you use. They all have the same idea. And that's guiding development with tests, with examples. There's a technical component to that because all of a sudden we're needing to think about, so I say that testers ask questions. That's what they do best. right? We think critically, we're asking questions. Typically, we've asked questions to a requirements doc, or if we don't get the code till after it's sitting on our laptop or computer, we're testing the software, or maybe software hardware, whatever it is. We ask questions to that. And I'm suggesting that in acceptance test-driven development, we're going to take those questions but learn to abstract them and ask them early. Let's turn them into tests and examples. And that abstract thinking it's a technical skill that we have to develop. It's not always easy. So if we start with a feature, that's what our customers are going to come with us. They're going to come to us with a feature. That makes sense. Some business capability. If you're doing Scrum, you might call it an epic. But you have this feature. You divide the feature into stories. But if you start understanding the feature, why are we building it? Can you give us some examples of what you're thinking about? All of a sudden, you're starting to understand that. But mostly we talk about it from a story perspective. So we get the story, a one-liner. Tells us something, but not a lot. So we take that story and we want to have the conversation. I suggest that you start with an acceptance test. High level. What's an expected behavior? What's an example of expected behavior? And then write a test. For adding two numbers, an expected behavior is 2 + 2 = 4, yeah? Misbehaviors, 2 + 3 = 2 + 2 = 5. Why is that a misbehavior? And start talking about what that means to what we're doing. You explore with real examples, not with valid numbers. 2 + 2, 2 + 3, 2 + 2.0. Right? Real numbers, real examples. That's where the conversation can become real. That's really what we want to start with. Now, once we get those real examples in the tests, then we're going to collaborate. And I've got this magic bubble down here. It's a big magic bubble. Where we start testing, coding, testing, and automating. And this is where we're going to start having the magic. Because at the end of the coding, we're going to have those tests all, in theory, automated, right? So that we can do our exploratory testing after. And magically, at the end of that, the defects will be fixed, right? So if you're thinking about defects, when we're first starting about a user story, when we're having this discussion, the defects are in misunderstandings. Making assumptions. Somebody didn't think about negative numbers, and we ask that real question, 2 + -1, what happens? Right? So you start thinking about the defects. Every time you ask a question and it's clarified, the defect has disappeared because we've got a test for it. Right? When you're coding, and after the code is built, all of a sudden our defects become real. And they take a little bit longer to fix, but not so much if you fix them right away. And then the magic, the product owner, because he's been involved in it, it's all good, thumbs up. He accepts the story based on those high-level acceptance tests, the intent of the story. And so it's really a kind of a circular thing, trying to prevent defects. So the technical awareness here is being able to abstract those questions early, but also being able to converse with the programmer in this magic circle that we're going to kind of get to next, right? So it means learning more technical things, like the test framework that makes that magic happen, right? Learning domain-specific languages, which then become a common language for both programmers, testers, and your domain experts, your product owners, your customers, right? All of a sudden, when we start working from the examples right through, the side effect is we get that common language and we can now talk, right? Everybody can read the code, perhaps, and understand it because it's driven from the very start with domain language, right? So as a tester, do we have to write the code? It can't hurt, right? Not a bad thing. But I don't personally think it's absolutely necessary when I have good coders on my team already. All right, so let's get into some of that more technical stuff.
In the early days of Agile and XP, we were struggling a lot, I think, Janet and I and other testers at the time and other teams at the time with a way to kind of capture this shared understanding and some way to express the examples that we could turn into executable tests. And, oh, sorry.
That's okay.
And I think thanks in large part to another Canadian, Janita Andrea, who got together the Agile Alliance Functional Test Tools group. Teams started to address this problem and develop frameworks and libraries that they made open source. And so as a result, we got things like behavior-driven development, specification by example, frameworks like Cucumber, and with the Gherkin language in Cucumber is a good example. And this exists in all kinds of languages now. Whatever your production code is written in, there is some kind of behavior-driven DSL for that language. And so some kind of prerequisite, given that we have a user with no account in our internet shopping site, whatever it is, when she requests to create a new account. And we know that create a new account is going to be a method not only in our test, but in our production code. There's a way in our production code to create a new account. And she enters a valid username and password, then something should happen. So we have an expected result, and our testing framework is going to allow the programmers to automate the fixtures that make that test work. So the automation code will take these inputs and these prerequisites, set it all up, pass it to the production code, which will operate on it, send back the actual results, and then the framework will compare actual and expected results, and we'll know if that test passed or failed. And our product owners and business stakeholders can just look at this part and understand what the test is. They don't need to know the details underneath about how that's automated. So those details are hidden from people who don't care about them, but they're there for the rest of us who want to see how that test is automated. And I think the most important thing about these test tools that are available now, like Cucumber, FitNAS, Robot Framework, some of the other ones, is that it kind of forces people to work together. So on my last team, I worked for a financial services application. We were developing a financial services application. We used FitNAS, and it made a lot of sense to use tabular type tests because it was like a spreadsheet. You know, we have all these inputs, and here's what should come out depending on the algorithm we're using. And I think if you asked anybody who worked with me on that team, they would agree the important thing about FitNAS wasn't the automated regression test we got out of it. The important thing is we had to sit down and start talking about the requirements. And the programmer might say, well, you have this test here. I don't think that's the right behavior. So then we do the power of three or three amigos. We go get a product owner or business stakeholder and sit down with them or start drawing on the whiteboard and say, what do we expect? Give us some examples of what you expect to happen here. And get that shared understanding that is so key to saving time and delivering what the customer wants right off the bat. And these frameworks are really powerful in that way. And so yeah, we get the bonus of having automated regression tests after, but it's not the most important thing.
And I think that's what people miss, is that the automation is the side effect. It's a great side effect, but the collaboration is the most important. Can we read the test, the business readable?
Right.
I know in one organization it was a utility trading company, so we were trading electricity, buying and selling electricity, which I learned lots about that. But we use spreadsheets too because it was a really easy way for our customers to read it, because they could look at one of these lines on a spreadsheet, it amazed me, and say, we bought this electricity at 5 o'clock on a Friday night on this month here, this price, this. That number's wrong. And
Wow.
I'd go, wow, all right. But that's our customers lived and breathed spreadsheets. So it made total sense to have our tests in spreadsheets. So making a business readable, some will like this because it's behavioral driven. Some will like spreadsheets. Some will like wikis and tables. So you need to experiment with what works for your team, right? How can you get that collaboration, I think, is the biggest part of it. The magic, I call it.
Right.
And the collaboration.
As testers don't need to be programmers to write this. But they can collaborate with the programmers on their team to automate it, and that collaboration is really essential.
By the way, I've heard of product owners that can write the acceptance
Definitely,
tests.
yeah. I've run into a lot of teams where the product owners themselves write the acceptance
Yeah,
tests.
and I have never had the privilege of doing that. In my experience, a lot of times the tester works with the product
Or
owner
partners up with them, yeah.
because I've never been lucky enough to have that kind of product
But
owner.
sometimes they're technical enough in their domain
Yep.
that it's easy for them to do. So.
Absolutely. All right.
So, though we don't need to necessarily write the code to automate the test, it's still really helpful to understand those concepts. And just to get the common vocabulary, make sure that the programmers on the team and other technical people on the team, system administrators, operations people, database administrators, that they feel comfortable talking with us and that they don't shrink away whenever we come over to ask them a question. And so there are a lot of books and online tutorials and koans and katas that take you through, like Brian Merrick's book, Everyday Scripting with Ruby. Years ago, I worked through this book and got enough Ruby competence that I could write and maintain some automated UI test scripts in Ruby using water. Cucumber and cheese, same kind of thing. Just work through some examples. It's pretty easy to do, and you learn enough from doing that to start being able to talk about those terms, understand object-oriented programming, the patterns, the design patterns, the refactoring patterns. You don't have to be a programmer to understand those patterns, and they help us communicate so well. And I found it's really useful to just get if you're having trouble, for example, the programmers aren't automating tests and you want them to, and you have to do something that works for them. So what's the language they're already programming the production code in? Years ago, I was on a team that was actually eToys, and their website was written in Tickle. Anybody here remember Tickle? I imagine people are still using it. And I'll tell you how long ago this was. And so they were not automating any tests at unit level or anything else. Our management had decreed that we should use Mercury Windrunner because they paid a lot of money for it, so by golly, we should use it, and we did. But it really we couldn't do all the tests we wanted to with Windrunner, and we wanted to get the programmers involved, and they were never going to even look at a Windrunner test. So I got a Tickle book. I heard it was good for automating tests, and it was pretty easy to learn, and I started putting some scripts together. And when I ran into trouble, I could go over to the programmers. They're coding in Tickle. And they didn't mind at all if I asked them a question. Oh, can you help me with my script? I'm having trouble. And they're like, oh, you need to do this and this. And it really got us a closer relationship with them because they weren't having to switch gears to talk to me. They were already doing what I was talking to them about, and they were happy to help me. So you can look for opportunities with that, and if you have a little bit of programming experience, you can take advantage of those. How many people here already use an IDE, Integrated Development Environment? Oh, good. That's quite a few. That's really good to hear. If you're not currently using one, ask a programmer or an operations system administrator on your team to set that up for you. Set up the same IDE that the programmers are using, Eclipse or IntelliJ or RubyMine, whatever they're using. They're actually, somebody shows you how to do it, they're not hard to learn to use. And now you can look at the source code. And you can sit down and pair with a programmer to look at, oh, there's some code that's having a problem. We're getting this trace back from when we do this certain activity. So let's look at the code. We can look in the code and we can run the unit tests. And you can at least watch them run the unit tests. You could learn to build the code and run the unit tests yourself on your own local environment. That can be very powerful. So these kind of things really enhance our ability to communicate with the programmers on our team. And again, getting that shared understanding, working together testing something, even before they check it in can be really helpful. This is also great for editing your automated tests. So when I've been doing the UI test automation in whatever robot framework or whatever language fitness, we manage those tests with the IDE as well. I mean, after all, you were saying yesterday that some teams have millions of lines of code that they're managing with their IDE and their source code control. We can do the same thing with tests. I'm often asked, oh, what test management tools do you recommend? Well, here's one that your team's already using. So it can be really powerful.
Yeah. The trick is to have the language and the tests in that same area.
Right. Yeah, and then everything checked into source code together. So, test environments. I think a lot of us have experienced problems around test environments. If we don't have a stable test environment, or we don't have a test environment that's only for us, maybe other people are changing it all the time. Take control of your own test environments. And if you don't have the skills, let's say your test environments are on Linux machines or Unix machines and you're not familiar with that, there are a lot of online courses and books that can help you with that pretty easily. And it's great to have the control because now you decide what builds to deploy. Or maybe you have a continuous deployment already deploying to that. But I like to decide which ones go out there. You control the data that's out there so that you know what expected results to get when you're doing exploratory testing on your test environment or running automated tests on there. I recently had the experience of, our test environments are a little bit too loose. And I was trying to do some testing and the data kept changing out from under me. It's like, what? This is not correct at all. What's going on? And I could see that updates were being made to that test environment so quickly. I knew somebody was running scripts against them. And I kept asking everyone on my team, and nobody admitted to doing anything. And it took a couple weeks to finally think of asking the iOS team. We're based in Denver. Our iOS team is in Toronto. So I don't have the kind of daily contact with them that I think of them right off the bat. And sure enough, I got on their chat channel and said, are you all using this environment? And they said, oh, yeah, sorry, did you want us to use a different one? I said, yeah, that would be really handy. So it's really important to have that control. Otherwise, you're going to waste a lot of time getting strange results and trying to track down the reason for that.
And that's waste.
Exactly. And continuous delivery, we were having an interesting conversation about that yesterday.
Yeah, so one of the things to me, when I first started learning about continuous delivery, there's some good things happening out of it, but the thing that totally kind of got my attention and I went, this is good for us, this is great for us, was the term build pipeline, right? All of a sudden, the importance of test environments, it showed, gee, this has to pass this test environment before it can go to this one, before it can go to this one and this one. All of a sudden, we have a way of talking about test environments that make it critical to have stable test environments. Whether they're being automated or not, it gives us a way to talk about them and raise the importance of it. So we're not constantly going, test environment is down again, right? So use things like that to show the importance of why you want a test environment and why it's important. All right. So so
we were going to share some more stories about that. I'm trying to find the time on here.
Don't worry about the time.
Okay, we're good. We're good. So just another story on my current team. When I first joined it, they were doing a really great job of test-driven development. They work in pairs 100% of the time. They do 100% test-driven development. And they also automate tests at the functional level and at the UI level for every story they work on, which is cool. The problem is they're automating those functional and UI tests after the fact, after they finish coding. And 9 times out of 10, they were misunderstanding or missing some requirements on each story because the product owner was pretty sketchy about writing the stories and assumed people would just know what he meant. And so I said, we can do this a different way. We can write the tests up front and some acceptance tests up front to help you understand what to do. And so I paired with the programmers writing some of these tests. And we were testing an API written in Ruby. And I'm not a great Ruby coder, and especially I was kind of rusty. And but I could know enough to occasionally spot a problem or make a suggestion. And what was really cool was as we're writing the task from code that's not even checked in yet, we're finding defects. And the programmers were super excited about that. They're like, wow, you know, we're fleshing out defects even before we get started, and also building that shared understanding. And so if I went and had the courage to sit down and pair with them, it's like, I think I know enough to at least be able to do this with them and talk to them. It would have been really hard to get anything going in that effort. So that's just an example of why the technical awareness can help you.
Yeah, I know that first team I talked about going in, and JR asked me what I was going to be doing as a tester. One of the most powerful things that came out of that was just pairing with them while they were doing their unit tests. They thought they were doing a great job with their unit tests. And when they would finish, they'd learn to say, Janet, can you come over and can I show you my unit tests? Right? The relationship had to be there, and the trust. It took a little while to get that. But then I could work with them and say, hey, did you think about this condition or that condition? And so all of a sudden their unit tests were much more robust, became much better, because they were learning a little bit about testing, and they got to be better unit testers. A few years later, when I was working on a team and we were doing remote data management, all of a sudden we had to learn how to do work with an embedded system. That was new to me. So one of my testers was very good. So we ended up learning a lot. I learned a lot about how to create and run simulations, how to be able to actually look on the hardware, the prototypes, learned all kinds of new things that was way out of my comfort zone. But learning those things has helped me to this day. In fact, last week I was just in an organization in Japan talking about embedded systems. And their system they were developing was very similar to the one that I had worked on. And so some of the things we had tried there or didn't try there, some worked, some didn't, all of a sudden I was able to call on that information. It was somewhere in the back of my head. It was amazing. But sometimes we have to stretch. Learning, what does technical awareness mean to me? And start to learn those things, right? It will mean something different for every single team, every single person. The other thing that we think about as a technical skill, it's also a thinking skill, but it's technical. Because exploratory testing can be done in many different ways. I've watched Crispin explain it a few times, thread-based, session-based testing, right? And I go, okay, that's really cool. But we need to be starting to think about how can we apply really good information, right? So most people, when they're starting to do exploratory testing, will look at workflows, journeys, go, you know, what happens if I do this, if I do that? But it's more about the workflow. And then I will see them move to, oh, let's talk about the risks. I find really good places to get ideas for what risky areas are is talking to the programmers. But then we'll start talking about risks and what kinds of other things. Personas. Very unique kind of way to do exploratory testing, right? Maybe we're going to test our slides, and I'm going to, how are we going to catch the attention of a product owner? So we could take and put a product owner hat on and do our slide deck and say, how would this be approached? How would it feel from their perspective? If you do those sorts of things from your application, who is going to use our system? And give them names and what are their likes, what are their dislikes. Pragmatic personas, Jeff Patton calls them, right? Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, if you say, I'm going to be this person, you will test in a different way. You will find different types of bugs. And so using personas is a really kind of unique way of doing it. Tours, and you can read about them as well. James Whitaker talks about them. And there's, if you Google on tours and exploratory testing, there's quite a few things. I encourage reading Elizabeth Hendrickson's book, Explore It. Great book for both programmers, testers, anybody's. It's a technical skill that needs to be learned.
And you can transfer this skill to people on your team who aren't testers. How many people feel like they have enough testers on their team relative to the number of programmers? Yeah.
One?
Not
two?
too many.
1.5.
And we have 16, 18 programmers and 2 full-time testers and 1 tester who's also a manager, so she doesn't do as much hands-on testing as she'd like. And so when we're developing a new feature, especially if it's a high-risk one, we get the programmers involved in doing exploratory testing sessions. We call them group hugs. So we'll have 1 or 2 or 3 developer pairs helping. And what we testers do is we write charters using Elizabeth Hendrickson's pattern for charters in her book, and say, explore doing this as this persona so that I can discover some things. And we try to give those charters, give them some direction because the programmers don't have a lot of experience testing, but not to limit them too much. And we want them to be creative. And they really started to come up with good ways to do testing. And it's really, one time they had a new redesigned UI they thought was pretty ready for putting into beta. And so we did a couple hours of group hug testing on it. And one of them came to me afterwards and he said, I found so many bugs. He said, this is not ready for beta. But this is a skill that they can learn, and this is one of the things we do on teams is transfer our skills to other people, and they can do that for us too.
Exactly. The last kind of technical skill, and there's lots of them out there, right? Lots of different technical skills, is the idea of domain knowledge, right? Programmers tend to think about implementation, they think about code, they're very low level. If they've been with an organization for 20 years, they're going to have domain knowledge. But if you have an application that's very large, I don't know, some banking organizations, insurance companies come to mind, all of a sudden there's a lot of business rules that is really hard to keep track of everything. And one of the things that testers do very well is understand the domain and the big picture of things, right? So we really need to be thinking about what does that mean to us? What does that mean to think about from the big picture level, right? That domain knowledge can make me special. I think you had a story about that, did you not? You were telling me yesterday.
Well, when I worked at my last job, it was a financial services organization, or financial service application, and it was all about managing 401k plans, which are the retirement plans we have in the U.S. And since it's government regulated, you can imagine the kind of laws that went around making sure that employers were in compliance with the plans they were administering for their employees. And there were all these incredibly complicated algorithms involved, and it wasn't based on logic because we're talking the government. So you just had to memorize these rules. And because I like learning domains, I picked it up really, I worked closely with the programmer, with the product owner, got a lot of examples and understood it really well. So the programmers and even the business people, operations people often came to me to ask me, okay, in this situation, what should the result be? And it saved them some time. And of course we want them to, we want the customers and developers to talk as much as possible, but sometimes it just saves some time to go to a domain expert that's right on your team.
Yeah. And too many teams, unfortunately, don't have product owners with that knowledge there all the time. Yeah. That is probably one of the biggest problems I see. So sometimes testers can have a lot of that domain knowledge to help. Doesn't replace a product owner at all.
Right.
Now, when we're thinking about thinking skills, bad phrasing, but
nothing to see here, it's all fine.
Lots of people call these soft skills. We don't like that word because it it implies that they're easy to learn, and anybody can do it really well, right? So we heard this term, thinking skills, from Elizabeth Evans years ago at a conference.
And Isabel Evans. Yeah.
Isabel, what did I say?
Elizabeth.
Isabel, thank you. Thinking skills, and it made so much more sense to us, so that's the term we've adopted and used. They are worthwhile. So things like communicating. We take it for granted, but it's how we share information. I'm really hoping, for example, that I'm communicating with you, that you're understanding me. And sometimes I get a nod, that's feedback, right? Sometimes I get and I go, what is she saying? Oh, it's not making sense. But I'm sitting up here and I get very little feedback from the audience. By the way, way more than when I was in Japan. But there is feedback as part of that communication. Now, communication is a very small part of what we do. The collaboration part is way more important. And that's working with people, talking with them, right? So we really need to be thinking about that common language. How do we get to talk to people and make sure? So the idea of ubiquitous language, we'll talk about that in a minute here, but using examples. And I'm going to go back to examples, real examples. Say 2 + 2. Is that what you mean? The answer will be 4. Cannot be underestimated how valuable they are. Making sure that everybody has that shared understanding. When as testers, we're information providers, right? So we have to deliver bad news because nobody wants to hear it sometimes, right? Part of it is how to learn to communicate, to say, hey, I found something, and could I show you because I think this might be an issue, but maybe you can help me with it, right? Way better than saying, hey, I found a bug. Can you fix it, right? How we approach it, how do we talk? That's a skill that is learned. It is a skill that is learned, right? Can I show you? Can you show me? Much, much more valuable because it's a relationship builder. That's what we want to be thinking about. Again, though, that technical awareness will help us talk about it, and we'll build on that. So ubiquitous language, way too hard a word. So one day, Lisa raises donkeys. She's got 2 wonderful little miniature donkeys and then a big one to protect them. But she was talking to me one day, and she's saying, yeah, I'm going to go show them, and I'm going to do, we're going to harness them up, and she started using all these terms, and I go, stop, I do not understand. I don't know anything about donkeys. I haven't been around horses, even though I'm from Alberta. I have not been around that.
So you're a farm girl.
I was a farm girl, a dairy farm girl. Ask me anything about cows, and I'm good. Horses, not so much, right? So she sat down and drew me a picture. Not quite as pretty as this one, but she drew me a picture and started talking and saying, okay, Janet, this is when I say I'm going to harness them up. This is the line. This is the bridle. But it allowed me to start asking questions to her, to say, well, this collar, does it actually have all of this stuff? So by the time she finished explaining, I had a much better idea. I will never know as much as she does. But now we had the same language. We had a domain language that we could carry forth, right? So we're going to involve you. A little exercise here. So some of you are at tables of bigger and smaller groups. What we want is form groups of 3 or 2. That might be 2 or 3. We're pretty easy, right? Right, so kind of mentally form your groups of 3.
Well, not just mentally, you can actually think
Physically. Oh, yeah. That's why there's 2 of us. Okay, everybody got their groups of 3 or 2? Ready? We're set? All right.
You guys are 2?
So,
Oh, Randy.
okay,
Randy, may or may not.
pick somebody And somebody might just say, oh, pick me. Pick one of you who has the most unusual hobby
Within your group.
within your little group.
Oh, no.
Sure. I train for triathlon.
Okay? Hey. Okay, guys, just pick it. Stop. I need my bell.
Who can whistle? Okay,
Thank
everybody's
you.
got it.
So everybody got one person? All right. So we're going to ask you to take the next minute to explain it to the rest of your group.
Okay. Let's explain triathlon. 3 traditional sports, so like biking, running, always in that order. Unless it's something really weird. Well, I'll write it down.
It's like in a lifetime. No, what time it is right now.
Between each of the sports, you have what we call a transition. So obviously, you have to put your bike down and go for a run. And so those are usually, for some reason, team 1 and then team 2. I don't know why they in there, but transition 1 is the overall distance is, there are some loose standards, patterns, but they just change kind of based on the sports. There's like the Olympic distance.
Okay.
And there's
All right, everybody.
Thank you. How'd that go? Anybody have a really hard time explaining? Not actually, it was easy? Everybody have a really easy time explaining? Did anybody have a really unusual hobby that it was hard to explain? Nobody.
No really strange hobbies here.
For real? Nobody had a strange hobby? Or did you all just choose really easy ones?
What was an unusual hobby somebody had?
By unusual.
Well, something that might have been very hard to explain.
Like maybe your hobby is, I don't know, developing an anti-aging formula, or I mean, people could have really weird hobbies.
Okay.
I don't know if it was hard to explain, but it was kind of embarrassing.
All right. Are we going to ask you to share with everybody now?
Sure.
But it was embarrassing because of the words you had to use, or just because?
Because the appropriate age level of the hobby,
What is this? We're curious.
it's collecting transformer toys.
No.
Well,
I'm guessing there's a few in
we
there.
asked my husband this question. We were practicing last night, and my husband heard us ask this question, and he said, "Oh, I take grain and make tea out of it, and then I put bugs in it, and then I get something to drink." He makes beer. So if he used the technical term for beers, for all the stuff he does with beer, it would sound really weird, but that's what he does.
Anybody else have interesting, anything come out of that exercise is interesting?
To me, Andrew's hobby is geocaching.
Oh, that's
Geocaching,
Yeah, and we were at this point, we ran out of time, but I was still trying to find out what's in the cache.
All right.
So the word cache by itself, it doesn't tell you what's in it, right?
Yeah, that's right.
But he was explaining, and we would have gotten there probably.
Eventually. But yeah, but sometimes something we take for granted, because you're doing, so I paint whiteware. I get some puzzled looks. What? So if I then go and say, well, I use my acrylic paints and it takes me hours and hours and hours to paint a little house. And you'll still go, oh. And I go, but I paint my Christmas village, right? And then all of a sudden you can start to think about it. But if I wanted to start using a lot of terms, I might have to explain what those things meant in between. maybe not really unusual, but sometimes the actual terms, what you're using, how you do things, will puzzle people because they don't have the same language if they've never painted.
And also setting the context. So naturally
Yes.
in daily life, you'll set a context, but in our professional teams,
We tend not
people
to.
may still start talking about something technical without putting it into context first.
So, yeah. All right. Sometimes an example would be very handy. So if I had brought one of my little houses and told you it took me 40 hours to paint, you might look at it and go, oh, if I did not have my house with me and said it took me 40 hours to paint, you'd go, how can a miniature house take 40 hours?
You paint a real house in that time.
But, exactly. But if you look at it and you look at the level of detail, you might go, oh, I can see. So showing a real example will help. All right.
So, oh, this
This is, yeah.
is yours.
No, this is yours.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what we just talked about, just to kind of sum up, our delivery teams hopefully already have people who can code on them. And test code is no different than production code. It deserves the same love and care and treatment as production code. It needs to be designed well and refactored and sometimes even developed in a test-driven manner, which is really recursive, I know, but sometimes that's necessary. But these people who can write the code may not have all the testing skills that we talked about. So that's why it's important. So have anybody here heard the term T-shaped skills?
Lots of people, I hope.
It's been around for a while. It is not from the software world originally, but I first learned about it from a blog post by Rob Lambert, a tester in the UK. And the idea is, on Agile teams, we tend to be generalists. We have a wide range of experience in a lot of different things, a lot of different testing skills, maybe skills, operations skills, database skills, other things. And those are our T, the top of our T, but we each have a real specialty that maybe we're especially passionate about or have a lot of experience about. It might be test automation. It might be testing data, testing business intelligence and things like that. My deep skill, I feel, is that I'm able to learn domains really quickly, and I really enjoy doing that, and that provides a good resource for my team. So that's the idea behind T-shaped skills. And so if we have a team of people with T-shaped skills, we come up with what Adam Knight calls a square-shaped team. So Adam did a guest post on Rob's blog after Rob did the T-shaped post and said, oh, we combine these all together, and then we have within our teams, we have a wide knowledge because we have all these people with different competencies and different skills coming together. And some of them have a particular skill and other people have a different deep skill. And so that really helps us bring a lot of different skill sets and a lot of different perspectives to bear on whatever problems that we have. So that's the whole team approach that Janet and I talk a lot about in our books, is that gives us the power. If we're having trouble with something like test automation, we bring all these people together and we can solve any problem. It's really, really powerful. When we were talking about this at a workshop we did in Germany last year, and one of the participants, Marcelo Leite, said, we like the metaphor of a Rubik's Cube. And on our team, we have all these different skills. And depending on the challenge we're trying to solve right now, we can configure those skills in a certain way and take on that challenge. And I thought that was a really great metaphor because we're all adaptable, we're all agile, we're all embracing change as we go. And so maybe we have to learn some new skills or bring in somebody with special expertise to add to our skill set for that challenge. But I think it's really a fine metaphor to think about. And, so where do we get these skills? What if your team is missing some skills or you yourself feel like there's more technical awareness that you need to add to your toolbox? My current team, we started a book club, and I've heard a lot of teams doing this. And the advantage of it was we're reading a book together and we're actually trying out the things in the book so we can practice these things together. And when we practice these things together, like we were reading Jeff Patton's story mapping book. And so during lunchtime, we were doing story maps on the whiteboard, and everybody else who wasn't in the book club could see this going on, and it intrigued their interest. And so it's another way to kind of get ideas maybe looked at by other people in your team.
Yeah, I was talking to somebody this morning, And he told me that their book club is reading our book.
Awesome. We'd love to hear that. And the communities of practice. My last team, we didn't have any business analysts, and our product owner was really struggling. He didn't know the right questions to ask the business stakeholders about these features they wanted. So we formed a community of practice. We had testers in it, programmers, the manager, the product owner, the scrum master, and we each did our own research and reading, and then we came together every couple of weeks to share what we learned. And after a few months, the product owner got much better at asking those questions and doing exercises from people like Mary Gorman and Ellen Gottesdiener of different ways to talk to your customers and get them working on their stories. So, this is your passion. You're in the software business because you love it. And so, find the wonder in your learning. Do things that fit your learning style and that help you and your team. Okay, so get back in your little groups of 2 or 3 and think about a skill that would help you collaborate better with your own team. And then think of a way you might be able to learn that skill. What experiment could you try to see if you could learn that skill in a timely manner that would help you with your
Just
team?
kind of take a couple of minutes.
Let's a little bit more open-ended. This isn't actually current issue for me, but my previous teams, I think one issue, one of the core or the fundamental issues we were having is that we weren't able, we didn't have the same picture in mind coming out of the story. We'd get a story written, sit the test, everyone would walk away, and in our heads was a completely different picture the entire cycle. And didn't have the way to articulate or question the story to the point we needed to get to, which is the point of acceptance criteria of the stories, as far as I and we were missing some vocabulary or something we need to have that conversation. We don't quite know what we could have done or what we could do to improve that. Okay, other than just retrospectively look at things and be like, well, that's not what I thought you were going to do, which is just what happened. So that's the only thing I can yeah, I guess so. Part of it, I think, is interpretation. Right? I always think of that tiresome picture that everyone's done because, the easy one is it's targeting this way or this way.
I know you can go on topic a lot longer, and I hope you'll have more opportunity to do that. Hey, folks. So I hope you'll continue that conversation during a break because it's really important, and it maybe would help you at the conference today. What sessions, as you're going through the sessions today and learning from the different speakers, what are the things you could glean to meet your own goals? So did anybody think of something that would help them or have a skill they wanted help with to learn?
I got a good idea.
Oh, great. What is it?
The challenge I face is that we're a large company with people all over the country, and so how to work together. We also use a lot of vendors, so we have outside software.
Oh, wow.
Right.
So she suggested the Scaled Agile framework. Which
Okay. So learn more about the Scaled Agile framework to see if it would help with the distributed teams and working with the third-party vendors and stuff. Great thing to learn about. Yeah, so this is what I love about conferences.
Exactly. Talk to people. A lot of people have really good ideas. All right, so let's just kind of wrap up here and we'll get out of your way and you can get on with the conference. Do we really need to be coders? You can, but you maybe don't absolutely have to do production code, right? You can code test scripts, You better be able to read production code so that you can talk to the programmers. Reading code is much different than writing code. So what makes sense in your particular need, right? You want to be thinking about what technical skills do I need to add value? What thinking skills will make me a valued contributor, right? What specialist skills will add value, will I need, right? So there really isn't one right way. Do you need to code on this team? No, because our coders will share with us really well. But maybe that team, we need to be better at it because they're not willing to share so much. One size does not fit all, but find a way that you can add value. Programmers in the room, find a way that your testers can add value. And it's not necessarily writing production code, because most testers, I'm just going to say most testers, have not been to university to learn how to write production code, or to BCIT, or wherever you learn your code, right? One of the things we want to do is add value, but keep on learning, whatever that means for you. And celebrate. Lisa and I are big on the celebration. All right. I'm guessing we'll be able to give this slide deck to you. Do you put it up, the slide deck?
If we have your permission, yes.
Okay. So there's a bunch of resources. We're really big on that. We also really encourage people to email us. We love to get emails, and it's pretty easy, right? Janet or Lisa at agiletester.ca. So please do. And we're going to be around all day, so come and ask us questions. And tomorrow, yes. So ask questions, and I'll turn it back over.
Oh, wait.
Oh.
2 books.
2 books. 2 books. Thank you.
Okay, we've written down 2 numbers, one for each book. So your job is to write down a number between 1 and 100, and the closest to our number without going over is going to get you a book. And the reason for not going over is I don't want to do math.
So there's 2 numbers, 2 chances for getting a book.
Okay, so
This
take a
is our
minute,
second
write
book.
down your number so that we know you're
Between 1 and 100. Between 1 and 100. No, write down one number. You have a chance to win either way. And the only reason you write it down is just to keep you honest.
We all write down like the same thing.
No, we trust you. Okay, everybody got a number? Okay. The first number is 23. Anybody have 20? Oh, there we go. Uh-oh.
23?
23. There we go.
Did you have 23 or like 22? Over, yeah. That was over. Okay, so you get 1. And the second number is
67.
67 or less.
Oh.
2 67s?
That's 63.
63?
Oh, there we go. There's a winner.
167? You have 67? Yeah. Okay, so we've got 2 67s.
Okay.
So we'll choose one more number.
We'll just make it between.
Number between 1 and 20.
All right.
Okay? Closest to 1
I've
to
got
20.
it.
Just those 2 people.
Just those 2 people.
Between 1 and 20. Who's
Okay,
ever
ready?
the closest without going over?
All right. So the number is 12.
12?
What did you have?
14 over?
Yeah,
8?
8. That's
18, they're both over.
well. We'll take the closest one.
So
then, I
you can do
guess.
the math on this one? 12. Or
14.
14.
All right. Well, thank you very much.